Good evening. Today is Monday, the 29th of June, 2020, and this is the fifth episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, Sargis Sangari, the Republican nominee for Congress in the 9th Congressional District of Illinois. Joining me today on our program is Judge Pat O'Brien. Judge O'Brien is the Republican nominee for the Cook County's State's Attorney Office. When elected, Judge O'Brien will be leading the second largest prosecutor's office in the country and will be representing and responsible for prosecuting tens of thousands of criminal cases every year across more than 100 law enforcement jurisdictions in service of the 5 million plus residents of Cook County itself. Pat was born in Chicago and was raised here, where he attended St. Ignatius High School, which is a rival of my Gordon Tech High School, wherein I played football against them, earning my letterman. Judge O'Brien also attended DePaul University College of Law. DePaul is also my alma mater. Judge O'Brien's distinguished career has found him twice working in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, handling high-profile cases, representing the state of Illinois. As a result of his service, Pat received appointments to high-level leadership positions in our state in the Felony Review Unit as Felony Trial Supervisor, Bureau Chief of the Criminal Division, and also he served as a Chief Deputy accountable for over 700 assistant state's attorneys handling criminal cases in Cook County. Judge O'Brien has also served as a assistant Illinois Attorney General, where he assisted the state's attorney's office with cases that they needed for major criminal cases, working closely with the elected state's attorneys in each county. Pat, it's my pleasure to have you with us today, and welcome to New Paradigms.
Sargis, it's my pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your thousands of people who watch your podcast.
Thank you very much, Pat. Pat, right off the bat, the one of the biggest piece that the individuals who are watching our program want to know about, again, is what happened with this weekend shootings. Again, as you know, I had written a letter on Memorial Day weekend and realized that we were going to have, an increase in violence, and I just wanted to have you take on it specifically from your perspective. What are the things we need to do to fix this problem?
Well, the problem of violence is a problem of having to actually enforce the law. As in my background for over 45 years, I was a prosecutor, a defense attorney, and also a judge in criminal cases. So of the three chairs that essentially are in a courtroom, I've sat in each of them. And as you pointed out, 3 of the last 5 weekends have been some of the most violent in the last decade or 2 decades in the city. And it seems that the state's attorney has not taken any action prior to this or during this time to basically keep the people of the county safe and to forward and protect the rights of victims. State's Attorney Fox herself is someone who never went beyond juvenile division in the state's attorney's office. I think she may have tried 1 felony case. She really is deficient in experience, and I think some of her actions have shown she's deficient in judgment of the crimes that were presented for charges by the Chicago Police Department in 2019. Over 100 persons that they arrested for murder, they asked for murder charges from the state's attorney. Those charges were rejected. So in addition to the high level of homicides that the county has to deal with, we have to deal with that the state's attorney is not even prosecuting those defendants and those arrestees that are brought to her attention by the Chicago Police Department. We can hardly stop this violence if we fail to have the state's attorney charge and prosecute cases, and do that in a manner that's both uh, quick and efficient.
You were saying, Pat, David Brown, the Chicago superintendent, stated recently that there are too many violent offenders that are not in jail or on the electronic monitoring, which no one is really monitoring. And I'm not sure if this is a systemic issue, or does this go back to the heart of what you were talking about, that the current state's attorney, Fox, is just not doing her job?
Well, clearly there are parts to both the arrest, the prosecution of criminals in the system. And the state attorney isn't doing her job because she never had the experience of how all the pieces fit together. For instance, when you put people on bond and you let them go on electronic monitoring, as you indicated, there's no one really watching them. The Cook County Sheriff's Office doesn't have the resources. Ordinarily, prior to March, there were 2,000 persons each day in Chicago who were on electronic monitoring. The Sheriff's Office, in their particular deputy shifts, had only 20 persons working to monitor those 2,000. Since March, another 1,000 persons have been put on electronic monitoring. The Sheriff's Office has not been given additional kinds of resources by Tony Preckwinkle to essentially monitor what's been a 50% increase in the number of people put on monitoring. You've got to understand that can have what are called movement from the house where they're supposed to be monitored. They can go and look for a job, they can work, they can go to school, they can have leave to go and seek medical treatment. When they do any of these things, and it could keep them out of the house for hours, they are not being watched by the county sheriff. The only electronic monitor that is there monitors them when they're in the house. Once they're outside, and they can be outside, they can do whatever they want to other than what they're supposed to do. So they can sell drugs on the street, they can go around with guns in their pockets. They essentially are free to basically be another threat to the community.
The problem we're running into also, given what we've seen even in Minneapolis, where they were talking about the defunding of the police department and disbanding the police department. I do know that there's some moves taken to even address those issues here. I think we got some of those slides. Number 3 should talk specifically about it, where it shows what they're trying to do in Minneapolis. What's your sense of what you're seeing here now from what you're hearing, whether or not that's going to be a push also locally here in our jurisdictions?
Well, I think there are a number of voices on the left which will continue that rallying cry to defund the police. But I don't think Mayor Lightfoot is for it. I don't think the Superintendent Brown is for it. And I certainly am not for it. The idea that somebody will break into your house, potentially when you're sleeping on the second floor and they're rummaging around on the first floor, and you can call a social worker to fix that particular problem and keep you safe, that's just ridiculous. I think we've shown throughout our history that with all the good intentions that people have and all of the good works that most of us to do, that there are some people that you actually have to monitor. And when they commit violent crimes, you've got to separate them from the rest of the law-abiding people. So defunding the police may be a loud rallying cry, but I think it's impractical and it is illogical.
Do you think portion of this falls into the issue of bail specifically, or is it just being used as a political tool. And I'm not sure if you could expand on that because a lot of people don't understand how bail is working, really, especially in Cook County.
There was a new bail statute that this state's attorney Fox has to take responsibility for, and it went into effect. It's been there about a year and a half now. And quite frankly, the uh, pretrial services, which is a division of the court, they fill out a form and they assess the danger that a person who is arrested poses if they're released on bond. And unfortunately, for instance, gun offenses, those aren't seen as violent crimes, when in fact, of course, uh, having a gun and walking around with it illegally is, if you will, the start of what could be a shooting, a robbery. It just isn't a situation where you should see this like it is, uh, you know, a theft from the Walgreens. It's a very dangerous kind of situation, and there should be a stiff bail that's imposed. So the bail situation essentially is taking cash out of the equation. But because Kim Fox doesn't have experience, she doesn't realize that the more people you put on bail, the longer it's going to take to get them to trial, because they don't want to face a judge or jury, which might put them in jail. And because it's such a slowdown, the whole court system starts to basically back up. You've got to be able to watch them when they're on bail. You've got to be able to get them to trial quicker. Kim Fox doing that, I don't think her agenda is to basically be a good prosecutor. I think her agenda is basically not to get criticized for putting people in jail. And if that's how your job is or role as a state's attorney, you absolutely are upside down.
No, look, I know that that I work with the Legion of St. Michael law enforcement community, and I've been working with the law enforcement community for a number of years here for us. I'm actually an international representative for them also, and on September 11 Memorial, I was with other law enforcement partners from across the country. On stage in Israel, recognizing the September 11th, because we lost a lot of our first responders there. Majority of my police friends who have actually served or were actually out there on the front lines in the riots said that they would have an individual who was arrested and they would see him back out again rioting later. And again, I guess it goes back to the whole bail issue. I honestly thought that, well, once there is if there's still rioting taking place, that the individual, even with the bail restrictions that are set out there, that those individuals were not supposed to be let go until the riots had subsided, before they were put on the street. So I know for the first couple of days, Kim Fox wasn't really at her station. In the military, for us, if something happened, you had to be there. And I know 2 days after the rioting started was when she finally came to Chicago from her home and started addressing these issues. I'm not sure if you have your take as to what may have happened, why these individuals were put on the street, and how would you have handled it differently?
Well, you're right. And Sargis, in your terminology, from March 18th to May 31st, Kim Fox was AWOL. And the state's attorney is the keystone part of law enforcement. The police can make an arrest, but it's the state's attorney's office that basically brings the charges. And it's the state's attorney's office then, having brought the charges, that has responsibility to get the case to trial in a manner that's efficient and where the evidence is there to obtain guilty verdicts. And by her being gone from downtown, which is where her office is, for 2.5 months, it was as if she was a bystander. And that's not exactly the job or role she's supposed to have. And with regard to whether persons who were arrested for looting or burglary even battery to police officer. On Sunday, the 31st, while Kim Foxx was giving a speech talking about her partnership with the police and how she was supporting them, her assistant state's attorneys in four cases were recommending signature bonds or I bonds, which allowed the persons who were arrested for looting, battery to police, and burglary to get back out in the street to join an existing riot that was ongoing on Sunday. So it really is both disconcerting and disgusting that she would do that. I would have recommended that, given there's a riot that's ongoing and these persons were arrested for that kind of behavior, that there should have been a no bond in place till Tuesday when it could be reviewed. It would have taken those persons who participated in the looting out of the situation where the looting was ongoing. The idea of putting them back into the streets of Chicago so they could again continue what they'd just done is a slap in the face to the police that made the arrests, and it's a dangerous situation that didn't have to happen.
I know at the beginning of the introduction, I did mention how many assistant state's attorneys you had worked with, but in this capacity, when you come into your position, how many are you going to be working with, and what are going to be the guidelines that you're going to give them in these type of situations going forward?
Well, presently the 2020 budget has approximately 742 assistant state's attorney positions. I, however, think there's a number of positions that might be state's attorney positions that are presently being used as policy positions for the present administration. I'd be looking into changing those to get more assistant state's attorneys into courtrooms. And the first thing I would do within the first couple of days is bring all the assistants together and tell them we're back in the business of being prosecutors. We're not social workers. You're not going to be awarded or rewarded for losing trial cases because you should win them. We're not going to be in a position where we're taking a back seat and not essentially promoting the rights of victims. Safety in the streets is our job, and if we don't do it, there isn't anybody else who will. I would then go to all the police departments, both Chicago, which is the largest, but to all the suburban departments, county sheriffs, the state's attorney, the state police that are assigned to this district in Chicago and the suburbs, and I'll tell them that once again, we're in the business of prosecuting. Bring us cases where it's a situation where we can help you by having grand juries add to the investigation. Police don't have the ability to subpoena witnesses in front of a grand jury. It's only the state's attorney that can do that. So we can have people testify under oath, and it can be a great inducement to getting information that otherwise the police may not be able to get simply by asking somebody to come and be truthful with them in a police station setting. So we've got to use the grand jury. We've got to get gangs under control in the city and in the suburbs. And we've got to prosecute all the kinds of crimes, not because it's a situation where everybody belongs in jail. I don't think that's the case. But it is a situation when you break the law, there should be consequences. Some of those consequences can be to deter future kinds of criminal behavior. People that are, have committed their first offense, where it's a low-level offense, we want to direct them out of the system so that we're not seeing them for the next 10, 15, or 20 years. I think that we've got to be more proactive as a state's attorney's office. And when we do a deferred prosecution, not just to say to the person you get a second chance, but not to put them in the same situation that brought them into committing a crime in the first instance. We've got to be more proactive in getting corporations to help us in getting job training, potentially getting positions for these first-time offenders so that they have jobs, so they have a future to look at, and they don't see a future as being something on the street.
You mentioned the grand jury. I know that because of the type of cases we deal with, I am a little bit more familiar with the Maryland setup. I know that they're called in for a year, and I do know that a lot of times people say that the grand jury did not abide by what the people were asking about on the streets as far as their particular opinion of what a police had done. But I know that in Maryland, as an example, they sit for a year and they actually go through the process of understanding what force escalation is by the police. They see what are the pieces and key processes by which a police officer has to go through in order to be able to bring somebody in to arrest them. Is there a difference between how Illinois works, how other places work? Could you explain a little bit more for our listeners? Because a lot of times the street never agrees with the process. How is it that it's different, and how is it that we can improve the grand jury system, especially in the Cook County?
Cook County grand jury system is such that you can have approximately up to 16 grand jurors sitting to hear a case or to hear an investigation. They can sit for up to 6 months and then have to be through the presiding judge. If you need them for more time, you've got to ask for them to sit for a longer period of time. State's Attorney's Office in Cook County can have up to 6 grand juries sitting at the same time. And your idea about how Maryland has their grand jurors sitting for a longer period of time, and I'd like to, when I listen to people, I guess, borrow their ideas. I'm not going to say steal since I'm looking to be the state's attorney. But I think that's a great idea. I think that there should be a grand jury, a second one, or maybe even a third one that sits, and they sit for a longer period of time. Most of the grand jurors, basically, as I said, they can sit for up to 6 months. Their term is 30 days, and then we get a new grand jury. So it's hardly enough time to educate them in certain more complex cases. And it's my intention that we handle more complex cases. And some of those happen to be police shootings. So I think it'd be a nice thing to bring to the state's attorney's office to have a second or third grand jury, which is special both to police shootings and also to other kinds of investigations which take more time. And I'm thinking we have the ability to do gang crimes kinds of indictments. The term that's used is kind of a term of art, an acronym. It's RICO, it's racketeering, and essentially you can get at gang structures through indicting gang members for their individual acts if those acts are done in the overall, I guess, attempt to keep that gang structure going and promote that interest. So I think the idea of when there's a police shooting, especially where it's serious injuries occur or it's a fatality, to have that grand jury which is seeped and has done some more kinds of, they can listen to officers that do training on the force model, which is the one that Chicago police and a lot of the police officers, certainly in this state and this county, are trained on, and probably a lot of the officers around the country. And it'd be a good thing for that grand jury to have some background in police force model, also in the policing itself. There's no reason why you can't have a grand jury sit and listen to officers where they're sworn in and they basically tell about, their encounters on the street and how those encounters, which start off just with, some verbal interaction, can turn on a dime into physical interaction and sometimes the need to use deadly force. So I think that's a great idea. And if you don't mind, I'm going to borrow it.
No, look, you can bother. We're all we the people, as I say. We're all one team, one fight, and we got to be able to help each other out. Look, I can
Yes.
tell you right now, Pat, that from the police side of the house, and I've heard this, seen this, it is very difficult, especially when police feel like they're being treated like a private citizen. For me, if I put my hands on an individual as a private citizen, I'm literally committing assault. A police officer has the benefit of understanding they could put their hands on somebody and then go through a process of escalation of force. Unfortunately, we're at a point right now, you see mass exodus of police, specifically from the force. You could look at how many numbers of death we have had just in Illinois itself for this particular year, 2020. And I can tell you that the senior police officers have literally dug their trenches because they realize that, even as we had shown earlier, Kim Fox saying don't take money from the Fraternal Order of Police, you have police unions under attack. You have new laws that are being looked at that are going to go directly after the pension of these police officers. So the senior ones have dug a trench and they're not moving. The junior ones that are coming in, unfortunately, the job of the instructor at the police academy is to train them to survive on this battlefield. And he's being trained that everybody's out there gunning for you to try to kill you. And you can't blame them when they see, attacks against the police with no prosecutions, throwing urine, feces at them, hitting them with rocks, stabbing them in the neck, ambushing them in the cars, running them over, as you saw on the statistics, basically with their vehicle. And when you have this individual and all he knows is that he needs to come in and there's an escalation of force of trying to uh, go through the process of securing that scene. And on the other end, you have, the private citizens walking around saying that the police is your enemy and you have to fight against them. This is not what we call a de-escalation. All you're doing is adding fuel to this fire, and unfortunately, the politicians do it too. As far as a police officer concerned, I can tell you right now, I would like to know that under Pat, when he's a Cook County in the Cook County seat, that I'm not going to be somebody who's going to just get prosecuted because of political requirements. That there's going to be at least the legal remedies that are going to be out there. Now, I do know that my job is difficult. I'm not saying that alleviate all the pressures off of me, but I do want to have at least a fair process where, instead of having somebody accuse me of something, there's suddenly a video tape that right away either I'm, arrested just like a regular civilian would be. I lose my job. I'm put in prison. I go through a whole year of, a trial process, or I am suspended automatically. I want to make sure that at least I have the warm and fuzzy, as we call it in the Army, that when Patton is in his position, that he's going to ensure that there's going to be a due process by which I'm going to go through the legal processes need be to ensure that either I'm going to be cleared or I'm going to end up having to pay for a possible violation or a crime that I may have committed as a police officer. Is it possible to ask Pat to give me the assurances? And if you're going to give me the assurances, how do you systemize those assurances, Pat, where I can be comfortable that I can start arresting people without having to worry about whether or not it's going to be used against me on a political basis?
Well, I think I have to kind of give an overarching statement on this. I think good cops are protected when bad cops are prosecuted. But I'm not looking to prosecute police simply as a stepping stone for other office. I'm not going to be running for other office. If I'm fortunate enough with the voters to win this one, this is it. There's no further. I'm not running for governor. I'm not running for senator. Unlike the present state's attorney, who seems to be running for vice president, it's not going to happen. But let me say that in my time as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney, I've prosecuted cases where police officers were killed in the line of duty and shot in the line of duty. And that includes Chicago police officers, Illinois state trooper, um, Cook County sheriff deputy. Also, when I was in the attorney general's office, local officers, one from Paxton and one from county near the Mississippi. So I've seen it, and I've seen how dangerous the work can be. And on the other side, I've defended police officers when I was in private practice who did get charged with crimes. I've been there. I understand how difficult this is. But as I said, if a police officer commits a crime and the evidence is there, I'm going to help the good police officer by prosecuting the bad police officer. But I know this. I know that the job entails and has certain protections that an ordinary citizen doesn't have. And the reason for that is when you hear a gunshot on the street and you're running the other way, the person that's running toward that gunshot is a police officer. And when you see a fight on the street and there might be, you don't even know the reason why it started, and you don't know who to help. The person that's going to help is the police officer. So I understand the position they have, the difficulty they have, and what they can know is this. There isn't a police officer that'll come under my watch that has to worry that I'm going to use them as political fodder for some election to another office or even a re-election to this office. It's not going to happen. I've served under 4 state's attorneys. I've had high-profile positions under 3 of the 4. I just don't think that there is anything more that I can say to reassure persons and police officers who are doing their job and are going to continue to do their job, that they can be confident when they do that job, they don't have to worry about me.
No, Pat, much appreciated. Look, I know we have a lot of other topics we wanted to cover today, but I think I'm going to have you back if you don't mind. I know you're busy
Well,
with the race. Let me ask you a question. Have you
Sargis,
received
let me
money
ask
yet?
you a
Yeah.
question.
Yes, go
Well,
ahead.
how, how do you see your role when you get into Congress of helping support law enforcement, both your district, which includes some Chicago, and I think it includes some of the suburbs, including Evanston and other of the northern suburbs.
Look, I think law enforcement needs to have an advocate in DC. Unfortunately, they don't, and they don't really have a major lobby group. They need to be able to start thinking and looking for having those type of lobby capabilities. But I would say, for me, going into Congress, it is the responsibility of the legislator, as far as I'm concerned, to uh, uh, to follow what is laid out in the Constitution of the United States. And Article 1 of the vesting clause is what really looks at of the Constitution, which grants the legislator the power to establish those laws, and in this case, to legislate, and is done both in the House and the Senate. It's not the job of the executive branch to do it, and it is not the job of the judiciary either, as we've seen in some of the cases that we have dealt with recently. So, look, when we send people to Congress to represent us, we cannot continue to pass on their responsibilities because it's hard for them to do what needs to be done given the political environment that they have created for themselves. I mean, they're not even trying to answer the issues of how to do police reforms. And in this case, police reforms, I think, are part of it to be able to alleviate some of the pressures on the police themselves. It's sad, but it's the reality of what we're dealing with. And what I would recommend is that as long as Congress can create clear legislation and policies that is driven by a reasonable standard. And again, I go back to the policing issue, a reasonable standard, what is acceptable by many Americans today and the American jurisprudence. I think we'll be well on our way of trying to heal some of the issues that exist. That's the best way I could help the police to ensure that literally I do my job and not pour fire on this fuel. And I think if we can standardize some of that training, create that federal equity that is needed. As I said in previous discussions, we had taken our military police, taking them to California with the California sheriff. We saw that across the board, there were at least 300 out of 400 hours where they pretty much did the same thing. So standardize that, get them certified and that type of a training. And then after that, They could do what they need to do in order to within their responsibilities, their authorizations, to be able to execute the laws that we are laying out for them. The police need to be ensured that they're going to be protected. It is not our job to come in and treat them like a private citizen. If we destroyed our institutional policing, somebody has to step in and take over. And eventually, the people that are trying to bring in on these concepts of community policing, and we'll talk about that later as to why I think community policing has never worked in law enforcement across the states, is because if the cop isn't there, somebody else is going to pick up the gun, and somebody else is going to use that gun to enforce what they believe should be the law or the proper way of individuals within those communities to act in accordance, as you see what they've done in the even a little enclave of chops that they have created for themselves in Seattle and other areas. Look what's happening today. Majority of the killings that are taking place are really point of the gun of individuals trying to enforce their influence in areas where police is not there. But I hope that kind of answered your question. I know there's a lot of other things we could have talked about, but we just don't have the time. Before we do
Okay.
leave, though, Pat, I would like to get your, give you the last word. Let me know where can people go to find out about how to support you. And I would ask you, as I've asked others that have been on the show, have you received any support financially from the Illinois GOP at all for your run? Because I know that all this is coming really out of pocket to try to go against Kim Foxx.
Well, the answer to that question is I've got promises. And if the television stations will take those as money, then we'll be okay. But I'm hopeful that those promises will be fulfilled and I'll get money from the county and the state party. And I'll note that my website where people can go if they want to donate to me is O'Brien for Cook, OBRIENFORCOOK.com. And I know that your website, votesangari.com, VOTESANGARI.com, is also up, and it's a great website. And I encourage people to also go to that website and to donate because the state's attorney is going to need a partner and more than one partner in Congress. And I think Sargis will be a great partner.
No, thank you very much, Pat. I think you're gonna do a yeoman's work. You've already done it based on your previous record, and we got to get you in. Now, I know that you were a Democrat before. You're running as a Republican, uh, but it doesn't matter. It's that we need to be able to get qualified people within the positions to do their job, and the current incumbent is just not doing her job.
I agree. And I've worked for Democrat and Republican state's attorneys, and quite frankly, it's a unique kind of office. You don't get 7 or 8 state's attorneys at one time. You get one person, and that person has to be able to appeal to all of the different ethnic, political, and every other way that people see themselves so that they have confidence that there's going to be fair and just law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And with that said, again, please go to Pat's site and also go to our site, votesingiri.com. We do need the money to support, and I hope that the Illinois GOP does come in and support you. We need viable candidates like you. Like the national GOP is fat like a hog, so they got the money. Somebody has to go ask for that money. Otherwise, what's going to happen on 4 November after the races are over, they're going to be using on those junkets that they take to Hawaii. So might as well support valuable candidates like Pat and others. With that said, we're gonna leave you with a video so you can get an understanding of what our police chiefs and police officers are dealing with on a daily basis. And thank you very much for your time. And we'll see you again on New Paradigms. God bless.
Thank you.
Well, I heard a lot of things. Certainly, there are some folks in this community that are legitimately grieving, and we heard from them. We heard a lot of folks who believe the First Amendment only applies to them and took great pains to shout down anybody that disagreed with them. Despite my ongoing disagreements with the police union, I have to say that their members tonight conducted themselves, I thought, with great restraint, given the ad hominem invective that was being unleashed on their work personally and the police department generally. So, you know, this is a controversy. This is a tragedy. I've said it over and over again. It's a tragedy for the family, a tragedy for Officer Manning. It's a tragedy for the community. But I'm not blind to the fact that there's a lot of people lining up to take advantage of this tragedy to flog their own agendas, and that was clear tonight as well.
You're accused of saying something to one of the protesters or one of the people in the stands. He accused you of...
You know, he was making so much noise, I have no idea what he's talking about, but he feels insulted. Too bad.
What's your response to some of the people that thought you were being disrespectful by being on your phone and not being attentive to them?
Well, I was on my phone, and yes, that's true. I was following developments with a 5-year-old little girl sitting on her dad's lap who just got shot in the head by a drive-by shooting. And if some of the people here gave a good goddamn about the victimization of people in this community by crime, I take some of their invective more seriously. The greatest racial disparity in the city of Milwaukee is getting shot and killed. Hello. 80% of my homicide victims every year are African American. 80% of our aggravated assault victims are African American. 80% of our shooting victims who survived their shooting are African American. Now, they know all about the last 3 people that have been killed by the Milwaukee Police Department over the course of the last several years. There's not one of them can name one of the last 3 homicide victims we've had in this city. Now, there's room for everybody to participate in fixing this police department, and I'm not pretending we're without sin. But this community is at risk, all right. And it's not because men and women in blue risk their lives protecting it. It's at risk because we have large numbers of high-capacity, quality firearms in the hands of remorseless criminals who don't care who they shoot. Now, I'm leaving here to go to that scene. And I take it personally, okay? We're going up there, and there's a bunch of cops processing a scene of a dead kid. And they're the ones that are going to be out there patrolling and stopping suspects that may have guns under the front seat. They're the ones that are going to take the risks of their lives to try to clean this thing up. All right? We're responsible for the things we get wrong, and we take action. We've arrested cops, we've fired cops, and so on. But the fact is that the people out here, some of them, who had the most to say, are absolutely MIA when it comes to the true threats facing this community, and it gets a little tiresome. And when you start getting yelled at for reading the updates of the kid that gets shot, yeah, you take it personal, okay? Now, no offense, but I'm going up there now.